So will the hive world of Armageddon be able to hold out against Angron and the World Eaters arriving for a second time? Let's talk through some current setting Warhammer 40k lore progression for perhaps one of the single most war-torn planets in the 40k galaxy. Hello and welcome back to Warspec Tactics, where today I thought we'd do a lore roundup of the 4th War of Armageddon, new lore for Warhammer 40k, and a return to a storied battlefield that's been explored many times in the setting before and in campaigns. First up, let's set the scene for Armageddon, and a quick rundown of its previous 3 wars and the outcomes from them, what's been happening in the era Indomitus, and then go through the 4th War in detail. Armageddon is an Imperial hive world with all that entails. In the distant past, it was previously named Ullanor, the system of power of the Orcs during the War of the Beast. It was conquered and settled by the Imperium, near enough all traces of the Orcs eradicated, and is a world considered so strategically vital that its fall would likely lead to the doom of an entire subsector. Armageddon has enormous hive cities with massive industrial capacity, great ash wastes in between, filled with all manner of toxic chemicals and blights on the land, which is a massive source of Imperial strength, and even has its own guard regiment, the famed Armageddon Steel Legion, notably well equipped with their mechanised armoured fist squads. After the brutal fighting of the Wars of Armageddon, famed Orc hunters, particularly adept at slaying the greenskin. In the 40k galaxy, Armageddon has become a byword for endless war, a concept named after the planet rather than the other way around in the setting, to my understanding. The geography of Armageddon has a whole bunch of areas of conflict. The vast majority of the populace lives on the central continent, which is split into Armageddon Prime on the left of this map here, and then Armageddon Secundus on the right, split in half by an enormous and near impassable equatorial jungle that since the Orcs arrive has been thoroughly infested by greenskins. Beyond that though, there's 2 other continents, a great big continent known as the Fire Wastes to the north, human habitation that kept to the coastal regions as very little can survive within, and then the frozen continent of the Deadlands down below, again with little settlement, though some important water purification facilities to supply the great hive cities with. Since the Imperium conquered and settled the system, the planet had previously undergone 3 enormous invasions, though few within the Imperium know the full details of the first one due to its suppression by the Inquisition. A great warp storm enshrouded the planet, masses of Cornate cultists rose up against their Imperial masters in a frenzy of violence and bloodletting, and Angron himself joined the fight on the planet, arriving on a space hulk alongside his world eaters with more cultists and some high demons of Khorne. The fight back was spearheaded by Logan Grimnar of the Space Wolves, who had summoned the Grey Knights to assist them, the Space Wolves giving as much as they got against the World Eaters, and when the Grey Knights arrived they conducted a surgical strike. After great losses, one managed a psyche attack to break Angron's blade, allowing the captain of the company to sacrifice his life and cast Angron back into the warp. As much as the actual conflicts, the aftermath maybe had more legacy, seeing the Inquisition and Grey Knights round up the entire population, sterilise them and sentence them to endless labour, or with the theory that the populace had witnessed too much and would be corrupted, and this was the best way to stop the taint of chaos from spreading. Logan Grimnar and the Space Wolves took issue with this, seeing it as an utter betrayal of the Imperial citizens that they were defending, even engaged in conflicts with the Inquisition, and was part of what earned them the perpetual distrust of the Inquisition, partly leading to further conflicts down the line. A long time after this, the Second Great War of Armageddon was when Ghazghkull Thraka assailed the world. Ghazghkull hadn't been around for too long at this point, being transformed from a normal boy into a war boss of enormous size, proportions and uncommon tactical genius when Mad Doc Grotsnake replaced part of his brain with adamantium. Negligent oversight from the planetary governor at the time, Hermann von Straub, led to Armageddon calling for aid far too late, and proceeded to hamper the defence efforts by making several incredibly poor decisions, including sending his Titan legions in unsupported to get destroyed by overwhelming numbers of Gargants and a failed virus bombing campaign. Ghazghkull's onslaught was met by a coalition of Space Marines, maybe the Blood Angels taking perhaps the most notable role. Captain Tycho was slain here, and Mephiston became the Lord of Death, and Dante ultimately turned the tide at the Battle of Tartarus. Salamanders and Ultramarines made great contributions as well. The Armageddon Steel Legion got their reputation as Orc hunters, and of course Commissar Yarrick made his name for himself here as well as the hero of Hades' Hive, holding out against all odds in a defiant last stand. Most of this is stretching back really quite a long way into 40k's history as a game. There was this Battle for Armageddon box set that came out in 1992, so a good chunk of this lore is well over 30 years old at this point. Ghazghkull was forced to retreat from that conflict, but of course only to gather more might, more resources, and return to fight his old adversaries, thoroughly prepared for the invasion. His assault on Armageddon coming 57 years after the previous, Ghazghkull at the helm of what was believed by the Imperium to be the single largest war that the Imperium had ever witnessed. Ghazghkull didn't just come in numbers as well, he also brought extra tech with him. allying himself with Nazdreg of the Bad Moons and a mysterious Orky inventor dubbed Archimedes by the Imperium. Teleporter technology was used to assault the world after it had been tested on Persina 4. Hades' Hive, the site of Ghazghkul's last defeat, was obliterated under a wave of rocks and asteroids, and rocks were used as great fighting fortresses that Ghazghkul could drop literally into the desert. And Archimedes crafted submersibles using to land greenskins from surprising angles on the primary continent, travelling from bases in the frozen wastes. The now demoted Hermann von Strab also managed to further impede the Imperial war efforts by turning traitor and allowing the Orcs to overrun Hive Acheron, that was hunted down by Colonel Schaffer and his last chancers. Commissar Yarrick returned to oppose his nemesis once again though, and played a great role in strategy, being a valuable asset to a massive Imperial war effort that included many big names and a big 20 Space Marine chapters assembled, perhaps the Black Templars and Salamanders being some of the first and foremost, Chaplain Grimaldus being famed for his stand at the Hive of Hell's Reach. With the massive effort, Ghazghkul's offensive was stalled, that the Imperium was unable to gain the upper hand and drive the Orcs from the world. Ultimately, Armageddon had held, and it seemed it was maybe a narrow Imperial victory, and Ghazghkul became bored as the conflict became less exciting and more of a grinding stalemate, leaving for conquests anew, with Commissar Yarrick and a crusade of Black Templars pursuing hotly on his heels. Yarrick's now been reported dead, though perhaps it's not 100% clear-cut as to how he died, or if there's any chance that his death is confirmed. Armageddon remained a world that was still vastly useful for the Imperium, though fighting a constant stalemate with Orcs on the world, many of them emerging from a never-ending stream from the equatorial jungles. Again, a lot of this lore has been established for really quite a long time, and then there's maybe been some small updates since in the Era Indomitus and the Cicatrix Maledictum. Reportedly, that shrouded the planet in warp storms, and Tzeentch and Khorne demons fought the Imperium, Orcs and each other in an extension of their great game, and Salamander's forces pushed back against them at the helm of a large force of combined Space Marine chapters. It maybe doesn't look like anything around that plays too much into the contemporary lore though. Before we jump into that though, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Plus2 to Paint. If you want some rather fancy miniatures painted, they're a commission painting studio based in the Midlands in the UK, run by Dan, a very experienced painter. Though somewhat new to the commission scene, I would personally recommend, both based on the sheer awesomeness of the paint jobs that he can make, and also being very reliable and will treat you fairly. The general idea with the commission painters is that if you want a unit or character painted up all nicely, you can contact them for a quote on the project, you give them a rough idea as to what you want, they'll say how much that'd cost and what sort of time frame they can do it in. Dan tends to specialise in the slightly more higher end things potentially, ranging between a tabletop plus standard all the way up to display level, and obviously prices depend on exactly what you want, the size and number of the miniatures and the quality. He ships worldwide from the UK, and contact details are linked down in the video description. Here's a couple of his competition winning pieces, recently taking first place Monster at the Third Coast Painting Masters, a competition at the UK Games Expo. These Necromunda Corpse Grinders have also won several awards as well. In any case, feel free to check out his stuff linked down in the video description and via the referral form if you would like some centerpiece miniatures or an entire army painted up to a high level. In any case, a big thank you to him for sponsoring the video. Getting back to Armageddon though, we've had all the established lore, so let's venture into the future and Games Workshop's latest updates for the war-torn planet, where basically their Crusade book essentially spells out the details of the Fourth War for Armageddon, more or less from start to finish. These Crusade books often tend to be when we find out about new things happening in the cutting edge of the 40k lore. This one was maybe a surprisingly swift update following on from the Nachman one when Chaos broke through the Sanctus War. And alongside the story, it's packaged alongside Crusade rules for fighting on warp-racked battlefields, summoned NPC demons that attack both players, and a tree campaign. A big thank you to Monkey for lending me a copy of this for review. In any case, the first that the Imperium learns about peril on Armageddon once again is mysterious visions being sent to both the Space Wolves and the Black Templars, warning them that there's a grave threat to the still embattled world. The Space Wolves are conducting campaigns against the Orcs in outlying systems under the command of Logan Grimnar. Jarl Stormcaller receives a vision of Armageddon in peril, and ultimately Logan decides to trust the vision, believing that if there is any chance of a true threat to Armageddon, it's going to be a higher priority than the campaigns they're currently waging, and basically withdraws all forces that can be spared from the active war zones and makes there at full haste. A similar vision is realised by High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars himself, also currently fighting Orcs and Tyranids in the Octaria sector, and for him an apparition appears of a burning figure, bringing with him the ominous sight of dark shrines raised over Ash Waste and the taint of chaos assailing the world. And after much debate with the other higher-ups of the Black Templars, Helbrecht ultimately decides to trust the vision, not sensing any taint or corruption in it, though not without some suspicion and mistrust. They arrive at the Armageddon system very shortly after the Space Wolves. It turns out these mysterious visions were actually sent by the Grey Knights, the Grey Knight prognosticators sensing Armageddon's peril and Angron's approach, and realising unless they intervene with the conflict, there's going to be a great victory for the forces of Chaos. The prognosticators doing astral projections to contact Grimnar and Helbrecht, and also one warning the Grandmaster of the Fifth Brotherhood, who diverts from the Nachman Gauntlet to Armageddon itself. These great communications burn out the lives of several prognosticators in the process, sacrificing themselves to raise the alarm. The Space Wolves and the Black Templars are the first to arrive in orbit of Armageddon. Their flagship's fairly well supported by the Imperial Navy, and Armageddon is still very much in ongoing conflict against the Orcs. Their primary strength may be boiling out of the equatorial jungles. There's also been some reported sightings of a mysterious bloodlust-inducing monolith. Orcs are far from the only thing to worry about though, as it seems there's an enormous warp anomaly in the northern fire wastes known as the Red Angel's Gate. The few Imperial settlements around about the coast of this are almost overrun and wiped out, the northern continent broadly in the hands of Chaos, and in the region of Armageddon Secundus, on the right-hand side of the jungles, a hive called Thoradis has been overrun, assailed by a great force of Chaos, to which the Imperial defenders overloaded a great power source in the hive, blowing it up with alongside a bunch of the Chaos, but they have captured the ruins, accompanied by a bunch of traitor Steel Legion. The Imperial forces divide themselves to the different war zones. The Space Wolves primarily land on Armageddon Prime, Logan Grimnar and his forces establishing order once more in Hive Volcanus, which is both being assailed by Orcs out of the jungles, and Chaos Cultists both within the Hive and from the wastes. Wolf Scout kill teams are deployed to root out Chaos Cults in the Hive's underbelly, which could certainly be a teaser as to a new kill team kit, and he also sends a small force commanded by a Sturborn Flinteye to meet up with the Black Templars and reach Armageddon Secundus. Helbrecht and the Black Templars have landed here. They land at the area of maximal Imperial control of Hive Infernus, restoring order and cleansing the Chaos Cults assailing that, and then basically marshals what Imperial forces are there to set out to retake the ruins of Hades' Hive and the shattered Hive Thoradis that blew up. They're heavily assisted by Krieg regiments. Helbrecht leads the main charge and assault on the enemy positions, and the Kriegsmen alongside Black Templar units commanded by Castell and Holzer establish a series of defensive Imperator lines with a bunch of artillery and fortifications to basically repel waves of cultists and any counterattacks against Hive Infernus. The Grey Knights aren't too far behind them, being drawn from the Preservers Brotherhood under the command of their Grandmaster Rothir Morvans. They hold their forces in reserve at this point, not even announcing their presence to the other Imperials on the world, dispatching a teleporting interceptor teams to investigate the anomalies in the fire waste and finding a cornate transfigured landscape, mountains in the shape of skulls, vomiting rivers of molten brass, and assess the best path to victory, to seal the warp gate and banish Angron should the prognosticator's visions become true. As the Space Wolves and Black Templars make rapid progress against the cultist forces and the Orcs, a new threat screams into the system. The Conqueror, the World Eater's flagship, is drawn to the ritual bloodshedding and the pulsing energies from the Red Angel's Gate, and the flagship of the World Eaters arrives, punches through the Imperial defense lines for long enough to do a huge amount of combat drops, dispatching some mighty forces of World Eaters all over the planet. Commanding the assault of the forces dropping on the planet is the slaughterbound Jarok Skrill, the sort of raised ape-bound that's bound with a bloodthirster, and perhaps slightly over-conveniently tying in with the new World Eaters model release for 10th edition. In any case, his and some of the primary forces command the fortification of the Fire Waste interior, Cornate cultists drawn into the hostile wasteland, and raising Bastion's defences and icons in the name of the Blood God. Forces of World Eaters drop on Armageddon Prime, and their small forces of Goremongers that raise the water for purification supplies on the southern continent, but perhaps the largest drop of the World Eaters' main force goes to Armageddon Secundus to reinforce the greatest Chaos strong point at the moment, which is commanded by a cultist leader called Ascara the Ensanguined, originally a Steel Legion soldier tasked with hunting out Orcs, and stumbled across that mysterious blood monolith in the midst of the jungles, and has since then been a faithful devotee of the Blood God, a large amount of the cultists around the world under her sway, and raising icons and rituals to draw Angron's gaze to the world. That doesn't seem to take too long for her goals to be realised though. With the arrival of the World Eater's big force, the forces on the Secundus continent are able to counterattack the Black Templars, Krieg and Steel Legion. They fortify the ruins of Hades' Hive and Thoradis, punch deep into the enemy lines. Khorne Berserkers now being turned loose against the Astra Militarum forces, which they go through very quickly indeed. And the presence of the Black Templars and their Crusader squads is only able to prevent a disastrous rout. What's worse for the Imperium is at the zenith of this brutal battle, Angron indeed does manifest onto the world, the sheer carnage apparently enough to draw his gaze, and he joins the assault directly into the Imperial Imperator lines, slaying Space Marines guardsmen and breaking her fortifications asunder wherever he strides. Back on Armageddon Prime, on the west of the continent, Logan Grimnar and his Space Wolves broadly seem to be having a good time against their opposition. The World Eaters there are commanded by a great bloodthirster. Logan Grimnar redeploys the forces to buy enough time, uses the confusion when the Orcs inevitably attack the Chaos forces that are also attacking, drawn to the carnage, and ultimately defeats the primary Chaos force in a great Thunderwolf cavalry charge, with Logan using the Axe Morkai to take the head of the bloodthirster. Things don't go quite so well for Helbrecht though. He assaults the Eumendes Bridge, crossing the waters that protect Hades' Hive, supported by a mechanized Steel Legion and a pair of Warlord Titans from the Legion Crucius. World Eater's reinforcements are enough to turn the tide in favour of Chaos though, deploying a trio of Traitor Titans that force the Imperial Warlords to back off, and the Imperials are ultimately forced to retreat to Hive Infernus. Before that though, the Space Wolves, under the command of Sturborn Flinteye, join the fight, interestingly using Stormwolf gunships to get there, still functioning and a promoted part of the lore despite being off sale from Games Workshop it seems, and they use one of these to alight on top of a Titan with melter charges and blowing it up. Interesting enough to see one of those have a starring role. Generally it seems basically like a Space Wolf victory on Armageddon Prime. Black Templars beaten back on Armageddon Secundus, and the Grey Knights are focusing solely on banishing Angron, putting their plans into motion. Their strike teams drop and destroy the primary monolith in the equatorial jungles, destroying the structure and one more link between Angron and the planet, and cutting down a tide of chaos spawn that come out of the twisted trees. The brother captain of the 5th leads an assault on an Orc-held manufactorum, which the records of Titan show held a secreted cache of vortex missiles, certainly a powerful super weapon that could impact the war in a big way. Strike teams are dispatched to retrieve dark relics from the First War of Armageddon, in the hopes to use them as a psychic focus against Angron himself, and Morvans himself teleports in to lead some strike teams to take down some of the greatest warp beacons, or at least the ones that he deems that the Grey Knights might be able to handle without outside support at this point. The Black Templars retreat back to Infernus Hive, finding that in the absence of a lot of the forces that they've drawn away from it, much of the outskirts and the lower districts of the Hive have fallen into complete anarchy, Chaos cultists running rampant. Helbrecht is angered that the place that should have had the most stability has nonetheless succumbed to the taint of Chaos, deems many of the outlying districts as just not worth saving, and orders the Black Templars to basically purge the entirety of them, not distinguishing in any way between friend and foe. Despite entreaties and criticism from Logan Grimnar, Helbrecht is unmoved as to this action, and there's little love lost between the two chapter masters, both disdaining the foe and accusing them of derelictions of honour and duty in their own way. The Grey Knights, seeming that they're ready to handle the demons, finally reveal themselves to their Imperial allies and summon Helbrecht, Grimnar and the Titan Princeps to a council of war as how best to purge Armageddon of the taint of Chaos and Angron back to the warp, basically setting the closure of the Red Angel's gates as the single most important thing and banishing Angron as secondary, as they feel he'll be back while that warp anomaly is still there. It's decided that Morvans will lead a force of Grey Knights, Titans and Marines to the Fire Waste. Logan Grimnar and Helbrecht let those named lieutenants command the forces to that area, where the chapter masters and their bulk of their forces will essentially lure Angron and the World Eaters into an overextended position ready for an ambush. As expected, the World Eaters and Cultist assault is unrelenting, pushing ever onwards towards Hive Infernus, and the Space Wolves and Black Templars make their stand around the Manufactorum where the Vortex missiles were discovered. After cutting through much of the Imperial lines, Angron bursts into the Manufactorum, only to find a council of Grey Knights there, with Brother Captain Hendron at the centre of a great set of wards. They burn Angron as he moves through them to kill the Brother Captain, only for the Captain to press a detonator, immolate himself and Angron with the detonation of the massive cache of Vortex missiles. It turns out the wards and incantations they'd set were to keep the explosion of the missiles in, not Angron out. So basically a cataclysmic explosion is purely focused on the Primarch and doesn't annihilate the entirety of the Imperial forces around them. In an act of great sacrifice, he casts Angron back to the warp. On the northern continent, Grey Knight and Wolf Scouts infiltrate ahead, raiding the coastal fortifications of the Fire Waste continent, silencing many of the pillboxes and armoured bulkheads ahead of the main invasion, and then the combined Imperial force between Titans, Deathcore, Space Wolves, Black Templars and Grey Knights push towards the interior, fighting the Chaos Cultists in a hostile environment between rad sandstorms, warp phenomena, and a twisted chaos landscape of Khorne. Chaos Titans try to stop the advance, but are driven back by the pair of Warlord Titans from the Hades Hive battle. The Grey Knights identify two great monoliths that must be destroyed before the primary gate is vulnerable, one at the heart of a brazen citadel, assaulted by Black Templars with supporting fire from the Guard Artillery and Tank Squadrons. Grey Knights are able to destroy that one by teleporting within, a further one on a Gore Beacon monolith on the top of a great ziggurat. The Grey Knights are able to reach that one more directly, but are counter-attacked by Jarok Skriel and his force of 8 bounds, with battle leader Flintai engaging him in single combat and slaying him, though apparently he's lethally injured, and the Grey Knights again are able to complete their mission. With the defences down, the Imperial forces fight towards the Red Angel's Gate, the massive warp gate perched atop a great mesa with a single scalable route, blocked by multiple Chaos ramparts, the combined force having to cast down several lines of bunkers, and the Grey Knights deploying their full might, all their Terminators and Paladins, going in for the final strike and closing the gate. The relics of Armageddon that they've been looking for were fragments of Angron's shattered blades from the First War, each one of 8 fragments held aloft by a Paladin, chanting a ritual of banishing as the Grey Knight Brotherhood Terminators keep the demons and traitors off their backs. It seems that Angron makes a remarkably fast return to real space though, not so long after being blasted back to the warp by those vortex missiles, is able to manifest again through the energies of the Red Gate, bursting out to combat the Grey Knights, his presence basically being a last-ditch stand for the World Eaters. Cultists under that Ascara's command see this as a sign for a last attack, charging and killing the Krieg command squad that's been commanding their forces up to this point, and the Space Wolves and Black Templars largely engage the World Eaters, leaving the Grey Knights to handle Angron and the demons spewing from the rift. The final fight has Grandmaster Morvans, along with a pair of his battle brothers in Nemesis Dread Knights, engage Angron, I guess the thing that they're made for. Angron cutting through an entire squad worth of Grey Knights Terminators, and demons assailing many more. As Angron engages the Dread Knights, he's able to cut the first in 2. He charges the second and overcomes him, is about to strike the killing blow when Morvans charges him, managing to get some hits in and land blows upon Angron with the augmented strength of his Dread Knight. Despite this though, and all their demon hunting prowess, Angron fairly quickly gains the upper hand, cutting into Morvan's chest with Spine Grinder, possibly fatally wounding the Grandmaster. It's just as this final fight is happening though that the Paladins complete their ritual. The warp energies of the Red Angel's Gate begins to falter, and Grandmaster Morvans essentially tackles Angron to fall through the gate, leaving them both in the warp. The Grey Knight Grandmaster of the 5th Brotherhood dead, but Angron banished back from Armageddon once and for all, for the 4th War at least. And that seems to be it for the story of the 4th War of Armageddon. Overall seemingly an Imperial victory, though as ever at great cost, maybe a little bit of a cliched outcome for Warhammer 40k in general. Just from a few personal impressions, it maybe feels like Angron's just a little bit too easy to use as 40k's ever-present threat that just comes straight back. I guess it's maybe the not most unlikely thing ever that he just throws himself at the enemy, destroys things, but doesn't care too much as to whether or not he's banished, as he'll be back again. In this one he maybe does broadly win the fights they'd expect him to, but seems to be a little bit predictable and able to be countered or outwitted. Charging straight on into the Vortex missile pentagram maybe wasn't the brightest decision he's ever made. Definitely felt like there were a few touches of product placement there from Games Workshop. I guess notably with Logan Grimnar, a battle leader, and a Slaughterbound being some of the main characters of focus in this one. And also a Grandmaster in Nemesis Dread Knight, which I guess is releasing for the Grey Knights with that upgrade kit. Wolf Scout kill teams certainly seem like an interesting possibility though. The last time they specifically mentioned kill teams by name in one of these books, we wound up with the Gore Chosen not so very long after, and they did get a fair few mentions and a starring role here. It perhaps feels like a bit of a shame not to get a bit more Steel Legion focus. When Guard are focused on, it seems to be around about as much Krieg as them. I guess quite a lot of Armageddon's wars in the past though have largely focused on the Space Marine conflicts, at least for the bits beyond Commissar Yarrick and his actions. Overall, for the outcome of this one, maybe doesn't really feel like it changes the 40k status quo in any big way at all. Armageddon feels like it was a planet that was surviving but kind of on the brink before, and probably looks like it'd be a similar sort of thing now. I'd be kind of surprised if Games Workshop decides to revisit the setting in any enormously close haste, unless Gazgul really feels like he wants to turn up for round 3. In any case though, let me know what you make of the 4th War of Armageddon down in the comments below. As mentioned, a big thank you for Plus2 to Paint for sponsoring this one. There'll be links down in the video description below. If you'd like to inquire about getting a miniature or army painting up properly nicely, whether that's 40k, something heresy, or something else entirely. In any case though, I'll leave that one there for now. A big thank you to all of you for watching this. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k news and updates videos coming, more usually focused on gameplay and model things, though it is interesting to take a look at current setting lore when it drops. If you'd like to support the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that linked in the video description. Check that out if you'd like to help keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.